My guest today is Michael Albers. Some call him Melbers. Michael is originally from the Netherlands and has been working in Silicon Valley companies since the late 90s, where he was at McAfee, Netscape, various startups, including Inktomi and Zobni, and finally at Yahoo. In his last corporate role, he ran all of consumer product experiences for Verizon Media, which at the time included both Yahoo and AOL. For the last couple of years, Michael has been working in advisory and fractional capacity. And the focus of our conversation today is going to be on managing the transition from a major corporate job and talk about what does it mean to do fractional work? What are the pros and cons of that model? Michael, it is so good to talk to you again. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks, James. Happy to be in the Deaker show, as you can see. So love the chat. Thanks for having me.
No, excellent. Now, let's get into it. Tell me about your last corporate role and then the path you found yourself working in a very different model right now.
Yep. Well, I ran the consumer product organization at Yahoo or Verizon Media, effectively the CPO. I managed both the product and design teams across all the consumer products for Yahoo and AOL, both. And as Yahoo, as you probably know, went through an acquisition with Apollo Global Management, a PE firm, it was a little bit clear to me that A, there was no need for a centralized product role. I think they were moving to a more of a GM structure. And then B, really for me, I had been working pretty much nonstop for almost 30 years. I think the longest break I ever had was, 3 weeks. And it was just time for me to take a bit of a break, kind of regroup and figure out what I wanted to do. The other thing is my son was just looking at colleges, leaving high school. And so I figured, let me spend time with him, do that while I then kind of wrap my head around what I want to do. And so I took about 9 months off and then started thinking about the kinds of things I could do. And within those 9 months or after that, I joined a board seat of a nonprofit. I helped kind of somebody bridging the gap between entrepreneurs in Europe or the Netherlands, more specifically in Silicon Valley, and started doing kind of these kind of advisory coaching, conversations. And that actually led into opportunities for fractional roles, which we'll talk more about. And I really realized that, wow, that's actually exactly what I'm looking for. I want something with some flexibility. I want some engagement across, obviously, tech companies. And at the same time, looking for being able to make an impact across different companies, different projects, different efforts. And so right now, 2 years and 9 months later, here I am. And that's essentially what I've been doing for the last couple of years.
Yeah, it's the transition you go through, I think, is very common and it's often not talked about. And so, let's get into it. You have talked about the term fractional to describe the work model. I confess that I hadn't really heard that term until a couple of years ago. And now I seem to hear it all the time. I'm not sure it's one of those cases of like you buy a new car and suddenly you start seeing that car on the road, but I'm certainly coming across it. Tell me, what does it mean to you and why do you see it as a model that is popular right now?
Yeah, it is a relatively recent term, as you mentioned. It's consulting in a way, but in my mind, a bit more official capacity. And so, and I actually recently wrote a blog post, literally a couple of days ago, because I got a lot of questions from folks asking about what's this fractional work? What have you been doing? Obviously, you've been doing it for some time. Tell me more about it. And so, if you go to my LinkedIn profile, LinkedIn.com/Albers, you can find it there. And I go into a little bit more detail on the pros and cons on that. But really what it is, it's essentially more of an interim role for a given project or a partial project where you bring all of your experience and your skills to the table, but you lead it. And so often you lead a team, often you lead the project, which is a little different in typical consulting, right? And it's, an interim role is something that's full-time, right? And so whereas fractional, you could be part-time, right? Maybe it's 20 hours a week, but you are really the CPO in my case, or you could be the CMO or whatever that may be. And so it really is an engagement with a company for 3-6 months, could be a year, which sometimes does or doesn't have an end date defined. But it is, I would say, a part-time interim role where you fill a need or fill a gap, right? And so that's really what you do. That's, I think, the difference. Why it's coming up now in my mind, it's really the difference between what happened during the pandemic. We've obviously saw the rounds of layoffs. We saw companies pivoting, focusing on key priorities. So we're kind of on the tail end of all of that, right? And so if you think about all those layoffs and things that happen, I think companies are a bit skittish when they hire, right? They're a little more cautious. You and I are obviously much more senior, and so I think it's a little daunting or almost a little concerning for a company that maybe have just come off a rough time to hire a senior person full time. And so the ability to be able to tap into that workforce it will be really helpful, right? And I think that really will make a difference. And then secondly, as you know, we have a lot of people that are in transition, right? They are in between jobs, they're trying to find the next thing. And so I think with companies being kind of in this transitionary, cautious state, trying to figure out what they need, but yet have needs for seasoned leaders and seasoned people to come in, and then a large workforce that's actually in a state of transition themselves, right? Either they're taking time off, or they're trying to figure out what's next, or they're truly looking for their next job. I think when you match those two together, I think you actually have fractional work that comes from all of that.
Is it fair to say that the model is most popular for smaller companies who haven't yet reached the scale where they can afford an experienced leader but need the expertise of someone who's walked the walk?
Yeah, actually, not necessarily. I think there's a couple of companies, and the way I think about it is it's really a state of transition. One is startups, right? They're just starting out. They might have some limited funding. They can't bring on a senior person full time yet, right? But they need help, right? And they might want some, in my case, product assistance, right? And so they're looking for a senior person to be able to come in. Either it's a retainer or within a given budget, right? And they're able to tap into that talent to kind of help them going, right? The second one is, I think, a company that's kind of at scale. They might have raised a round. They're maybe doing a strategic pivot, right? They now need to kind of bring that scale to the table, which again, where experience can really be a lot of help. And then third is really, I think, a company that's in a turnaround, right? They are looking for transformation. They are looking to kind of either establish a team, or they need a project to take off. And there's various states there. And then I think the last one I realize is there's a gap, right? The CPO left, the CMO left, right? The team is kind of needs guidance. They need leadership, and I think that's the difference with fractional, is that you step into a leadership role, right? You lead the team, you lead the effort, and so I think there are a variety of states there where companies need that. And so, one of my current clients is a 1,000-employee company. They're a large company, but they're in a state of transition. And I think companies in these states of transition, they're a perfect fit in my mind, right? Whether that's early stage or they're pivoting or whatever that may be. And in my case, right, that previous team was unfortunately laid off because they got acquired by a PE firm. So they restructured, they cut some costs, then realize, oh, we got to now deliver against a bunch of these objectives. And so that's where or somebody like myself would come in, right? Lastly, briefly on that too, I think there is an opportunity there for senior talent that is looking for a full-time job to come in and show you can do the job, right? And so it's kind of a try before you buy, if that's what you're looking for. And so I think it's low risk for the company because they're able to kind of predictably manage within a budget. And I think it's an opportunity for those looking for employment to kind of come in and say, like, no, I could be your CPL, right? And then if you're obviously doing a great job, that might evolve. And I've certainly seen that happen as well. So it's all over. Yeah.
Yeah, playing back what I'm hearing from you, fractional is more sort of active leadership than just traditional advisory or consulting work, including potentially having teams reporting to you and potentially having significant client-facing responsibilities. You and I have a mutual friend who has a whole marketing team that reports to him, even though he is less than full-time. But clearly there are challenges to the model. What do you see as the biggest challenges to the model working effectively?
Yeah, I exactly as you said, right? First and foremost, it's you're putting yourself in a interim leadership role, right? And not full time. So I think that's the difference with fractional. You need to have the right mindset, right? You come in knowing that this is likely an interim engagement, right? And so that is, I think, important, the mindset. Two is, you have to embrace it as if you are the dedicated full-time leader for that team, for that project, for that group. And in some cases, they've been struggling, right? They might have been floundering, right? They're leaderless. Maybe the CEO stepped in, right? Somebody else, and they obviously need guidance. And so the challenge is that you're ultimately not permanent, right? And so that might be unsettling for some of these folks. I've seen where they're on their third manager, and you're now the other interim manager, and that obviously paints a picture that there will be another person coming, right? And so that can be tough. And so you have to, I think, really test your leadership skills and your managerial skills in how do you motivate such a team, right? How do you get them kind of moving again, right? But you do play a very important role in that. You take that management away from, I don't know, the CEO, and really drive that team towards delivering, right? And I think with experience, you can obviously have immediate impact there. And it's about getting the organization set up as well, right? And so I think part of your role might be to build a future organization, right? And so you hire for the future and permanent CPO, right? You might hire and bring on talent, right? And in some cases, you may even make adjustments to the organization and folks that maybe aren't delivering or aren't set up for success. You help with that, and so I think that's really where the difference is.
For those that are making it work, what are the things that are key to making the fractional role successful? You talk about mindset. What are the other things that are important to having the fractional experience work?
Yeah, I think experience is a big one, right? And so, as I mentioned, you come in with that mindset, knowing what you're getting yourself into. Your own leadership experience and track record, I think, is really important. Aim for impact, right? And so I think by bringing everything you have, right, your experience, your leadership skills, your overall skill sets, having immediate impact is what they're looking for, right? And so that means you have to set up the right team, the right process. You got to drive towards the right outcomes, align everybody, right? And so this is the typical thing, but you're on a much tighter timeline, right? And so you have to keep that in mind. And so I think when you establish that and really get the machinery moving, like I said, sometimes they felt stuck or they haven't been moving. And so they often welcome guidance, right? And leadership and let's go and some excitement around that. And so I think that's really an important piece to think through. And like I said, sometimes they'll want you to stay in a permanent capacity. Because if they like you and they like how things are working, that's good. And so you have to think about what that means. And so I think it's really how you enter it and knowing kind of your role in that and what you can do and what you can't do. At the same time, right, it also means it's cyclical, right? And so, you have to spend a lot of time networking, building contacts, working on your referrals, get the word out there, right, et cetera. It's like in order to make it work, you have to keep at it, right? And, find the balance of what you need, what you're looking for as far as, time spent, and then, finding the next gig when one runs out, right?
I want to get into the pros and cons and be more specific about the pros and cons relative to a sort of traditional full-time corporate role. And let's start from the employee side for you as the fractional worker or for others in a similar situation. What are the pros and cons for the worker going into a gig like this?
Yep. For me, right, and this is obviously speaking from my own experience, primarily it's flexibility, right? I mean, you're your own boss. You manage your own schedules. Of course, you have stand-ups at given times and things like that, but you drive the flexibility. Like you commit to, okay, I can do 20 hours a week for you, right? Or 10 hours, right? And I was talking to Sean Quick recently, and I was like, if I want to eat oysters on Thursday, I eat oysters on Thursday, right? I love going up, Northern California and have the oysters there, right? So that's one. I love the diversity, so I think that's really a pro. You can have immediate impact, right? I mean, we've done so much. I think we have so much experience to offer, certainly startups, right? That's one. It's income, right? When you're idle. And so if you are in transition or you're looking for a job, I think that's an important piece. And so you're obviously putting your skill set to use. You're actually building up your resume in a way. And so I think that's an important piece. And I think in some cases it can lead to a long-term role, right? And so obviously with that, you're managing and leading a team, right? You're working in different industries, different tech areas, different segments. You're building out your network, your reputation, right? I think there's a lot of pros right there, including, and I think we'll talk about that shortly a little bit as well, is, getting your hands dirty, right? You're working on all these different things. You're honing a lot of your skills that you might not have touched for some time, right? On the flip side, as I mentioned, it takes a lot of work, right? You do need to keep networking. You do need to work on your clients. You do need to have the coffees and the Zoom calls and, all that conversation, right? Work can be unpredictable, right? From times like I will feel like I will have a full-time job, if not more. And then 2 weeks later, it's like, okay, it's crickets, it's downtime, and that's okay, right? You have to be comfortable with that. And so, I think that those are some things to think through. The downtime I use, obviously, to kind of then figure out, other things to hone in on, or personal time or whatever. I think a big one for many is like there's no healthcare, and so you're not employed, you're not getting benefits, right? And so I pay for my own healthcare, for example. Now, as a self-employed person, I can write that off, right, from a tax perspective, and so there's benefits of that side of it. And over time, you'll have to think about how somebody looks at that, right? If you're doing this like me for almost 2 years, right? Do people frown upon that or not, right? He hasn't been in his full-time job or not, right? I don't know, to be honest. It hasn't, in my mind, been an issue necessarily. And then, like I said, it's short-term in nature. You get through a project, things are moving, and then at that point, you want to see it through fruition. Sometimes that doesn't always happen, right? And so, and you have to be comfortable with that. I don't mind getting something going and then handing it off to somebody.
So thank you for that. And, obviously that's your experience as someone who's been doing fractional. Put yourself in the employer's shoes if you can for a moment, and talk me through some of the same pros and cons from their perspective of working with someone who is fractional rather than full-time.
Yep. As I mentioned before, right, I think it gives a company the ability to try you before buying, right? And so instead of a permanent hire, or they might not have the budget for it, they can obviously engage somebody that has experience and brings a lot of skills to the table, right? And with that, it's lower costs, right? They don't pay stock, salary, benefits, right? And so I think that's a benefit for the company. They often have a gap, right? An immediate need, like somebody left, or the project is getting a lot of pressure, but they don't have people to kind of lead it and see it through. And so I think that's beneficial for them versus continue to interview or finding that unicorn person that they're looking for, right? I think they get access to a lot of experience and skills that they might not otherwise be able to afford, say, or be able to tap into. I think often it's much more seasoned people that get them traction. An immediate impact, right? I mean, they're looking for like, okay, I have a deadline, I got to deliver X, right? By 6 months from now, my God, how am I going to do that? I haven't even interviewed enough people. And so the rapid and immediate impact where they know things will get done without very little ramp up or lead time, I think gives them a lot of comfort. And then, as I mentioned, right, a big difference with fractional workers are that they lead a team. And so if you have a gap, right, the CPO say left, right, that's comfort, right? They're like, okay, I trust you can lead and manage the team, right? Obviously through conversations. And so that's a big difference there. The con is that, obviously you bring somebody in kind of in an interim capacity. And so, you need a long-term solution, right? And so, and as I mentioned, it could be disruptive to the existing team, knowing that you're bringing somebody in again in the interim. So in that respect, I think it's a bit more challenging from a cultural perspective. I think also it can become cost prohibitive, right? And so depending on your hourly rate, right? I mean, and depending on how much you work, 6 months, 9 months in, they're like, okay, now it's cost will add up, right? And so, but I do think again it helps them bootstrap a bit. And then, again, you need to ramp someone up, right? And on the team, the tech, the product, and so which would otherwise be so much short term. And I think the other side of it is that there's very clear pressure, and often deliverables are defined, and so that's really an important piece as part of that. And it's tied to your contract, right? And so it's very clear up front. But I do think there's more benefits for a company than there aren't.
Okay. One of the things I want to talk about is the benefit of getting back involved in direct work and doing the work. And one of the things you and I talked about when we spoke a few weeks ago, we were reconnecting, was as you become more senior in most companies, you spend more and more time managing your team, managing the relationships with those around you, and you don't actually have very much time doing hands-on work. And over the last year, I've enjoyed doing work product, whether it's editing a video, consulting on projects directly, creating the materials. Have you had the same experience of sort of enjoying getting back involved in the day-to-day work?
Yeah, I honestly, this is probably the part I enjoyed the most, to be honest. My last true corporate role, it was just operational. I was in meetings all day. I was in various sessions. I was in discussions. I felt so far removed from product, to be honest, and getting my hands dirty. When I did have the various, design reviews or product meetings, I felt the best, right? And so not only are my clients and the projects pretty diverse, which to me keeps it just interesting, right? And I can see the impact happen. I also enjoy actually having to dive in and get your hands dirty, right? Sometimes you don't have the resources you typically would have, and so you kind of have to roll up the sleeves, which I think is great, and I really enjoy, right? And so, for example, my last client, where I was driving, helping them with their rebranding of their company and the website, right? A bunch of digital efforts. At times I was doing the work, direct work, right? I was literally editing and creating content. I was, testing the website, making sure that worked. I was making sure, things look good. I was using my CSS skills, which I had to dust off, right? And so I love it, right? It's really, really nice to kind of do that. And I think part of it is I kind of miss that time being an individual contributor, right? And so, yes, if you manage a team, that's different. But at times you do operate as an individual contributor, managing partners and others. I don't know, I like it. And so I really enjoy that part. And again, it might not be for everybody, but it's what I do enjoy, is that it's satisfying, it's diverse. I get to do a lot of different things. And frankly, I feel like I'm honing my skill more than I did in a corporate job, right? I have to tap into lots of different pieces, right? And so I enjoy that. And so I agree. It's a lot of fun. I think it can be really rewarding.
Michael, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about this. As I said at the start, you and I have sort of found ourselves in situations that are so different than how we were working a couple of years ago. And it's a little disconcerting. It's when you're used to the structure of a corporate environment. But I think clearly you and I are both enjoying how we're spending our day-to-days. And I hope there's some lessons for others out there. I certainly, when I left my last corporate job, ended up just reaching out to about 50 different people who are sort of at the same life stage as us. And it is incredibly good to know that there is a community of people out there who can sort of help think through some of the challenges that you face. And I genuinely hope that this material is useful to others in similar life stages to you and I. So thank you so much. I will link to the newsletter that you referenced, the LinkedIn newsletter on Fractional. Is there any other last thoughts that you'd like to leave us with?
No, thanks for having me. I love this stuff. I'd say, look, if you are at a company in transition and you're looking for folks, think about your network, right? The fractional workers, even folks that might be in between jobs because you know them, you know their background, one. And then on the flip side, if you're looking for work, I think it's a great way to, to stay active and do stuff versus, spending your day on LinkedIn and applying to jobs and live in the world of resumes and terrible uploading tools. So, I think this might be a way it's a win. It can be a win-win in my mind. So thanks for having me. Hopefully it helps.
Thank you so much. Have a good rest of your day. Bye.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.